over to the bracket, though, to find out what match we're going to be focusing on next. We are going to be moving down the list. So it is going to be Calvin Foster going up against Paul Chua.
In top 8, the pressure is mounting for both of these trainers. So seeing if you are Calvin, you know this is not going to be a very easy matchup. But as we were referencing those accomplishments that the trainers have had up to this point here, so Paul definitely you would say the experience advantage would be heading over to Paul with Calvin. Calvin does have the home field advantage, much who knows, that might slower paced and bulky Pokemon on Paul's, and you do potentially have the option to fake out the Zacian on this turn if you are Paul. The Intimidate has helped you because it has essentially neutralized that Intrepid Sword boost to your attack stat, bringing it back down to neutral. You can't fake out Calyrex, obviously, so you might have to take the turn with Porygon. If we saw actually yesterday, Sierra, when Porygon's on the field against a Calyrex Shadow Rider, it's not a great spot for Calvin because Porygon is a normal type, and it usually runs Foul Play, which would hit the Calyrex 4 times super effectively.
Yeah, Calyrex Shadow Rider can be such a strong Pokemon, but not when you cannot hit whatsoever. But maybe with the single targeting into something that won't care about that resistance or not being able to the immunity, it's going to be that Dynamax for Calvin. I was not expecting that.
I was definitely not expecting that because typically the Shadow Rider players like to click Astral Barrage because it's a spread attack. Now that you're Dynamax, you can only hit one target, and it's either a normal type or a dark type.
Well, one thing that these Calyrex Shadow Riders do have is that coverage, and it will be that Max Quake. A lot of damage going to be done onto the Incineroar on Paul's end, but not quite enough to be picking up that KO.
Yeah, I'm sure that was a calculated amount for Incineroar, knowing, training it to be able to take that hit.
Well, Calyrex is going to be taking that hit as well, thanks to the fact it was Dynamax and Throat Chop doing heaps of damage. But Porygon 2 in a free position be setting up this Trick Room for Paul to be able to capitalize off of the incoming turns.
And now that that Trick Room is up, this Porygon is going to be the fastest, potentially fastest Pokemon besides Gastrodon on the field. Regardless, it will be moving before the Calyrex Shadow Rider would. And since you've Dynamaxed it on Calvin's side, you don't want to give that up. You don't want to switch it out. If you're going to max guard on this turn, that's your second turn of Dynamax is essentially wasted because Porygon is at full HP. You didn't even touch it. Usually you try to bring Porygon down, and then it takes half its health so it can Trick Room and recover it back up. You're already full HP. You're roaring and ready to go for a Foul Play into that Calyrex slot there. So what is Calvin's adjustment on this play? Because he doesn't want his Dynamax and his restricted Pokemon to be knocked out so early.
Exactly, whereas on Paul's end, this is the time you have that Trick Room that you're going to go for that manual swap out with the Incineroar. This Calyrex Shadow Rider not in a safe position whatsoever. One turn of Dynamax is all it's going to be before that reposition out into the Zacian.
Yeah, you literally had to switch it out there. It was going to be knocked out if you didn't do anything about it. So, understandable play, but just unfortunate you don't get to use your Dynamax turns.
Yeah, maybe save it in the back when you have that speed on your end. And Incineroar, since it's swapped out, the Palkia is going to take the Earth Power instead from the Gastrodon, the special defense falling. Now a Fallow Play from this Porygon 2. Not very effective, but all things considered, a good amount of damage from a Porygon. And
right, the Foul Play, you use your opponent's attack stat against them. Foul Play does more damage the higher the target's attack is. Obviously, Zacian is very strong in its attack there. And critically, it looked like with the investment on Porygon, if there was a substitute, not saying there is, but if it was substitute Zacian, Foul Play would break through with that amount of damage.
It's going to be another swap coming out from Calvin. It's so important to try and get through these turns of Trick Room while maintaining your attacker so that you can try and go on the offensive once it's all done. Now a Yawn from Gastrodon to try and further slow things down from Paul, forcing Paul into a position maybe with the Palkia next turn to have to switch it out. A little bit of damage, but at least it's going to be popping that air balloon on the Incineroar. Now the Flamethrower, this isn't really going to be doing much either. It's just good for that little bit of chip.
The double target into the Incineroar switching is great for Calvin because it hardly took any damage. Sure, you lost the air balloon, but you're not worried about the any ground attacks right now on this turn. So Incineroar takes that much better than Zacian would have. And then think about Paul has not really utilized these last two turns of Trick Room that well. The Foul Play didn't do much damage to Zacian. Here you hardly did anything to Incineroar. So Calvin, if you can just make it back to the regular dimensions, that can be really helpful.
Except you need to find a way to make sure once the dimensions are gone that they're not just going to get reset up. Because at this point, this Porygon 2 is sitting pretty comfortably. This yawn, though, definitely a way to try and force it out of play to make sure it can't be setting up the Trick Room as soon as it expires. So well done there from the Gastrodon. Now with Flare Blitz from Incineroar to start getting a little bit of offensive damage done, going into that Calyrex Ice Rider.
Yeah, I mean that would have been a resisted attack at the start of this turn. So I think Calvin was predicting a switch in here. Paul realizing he's kind of losing his ground with his Trick Room turns. There's only one turn remaining, so Calvin seeing that as a great opportunity to be able to hit the Calyrex on the way in for some pretty solid damage there. So what can Paul do on this last turn? The Porygon is still at full health, so if you just keep clicking foul play every turn in front of Incineroar and Gastrodon and things, that's not going to be enough damage.
Except you're in the tricky position this turn that you have been yawned, so you do have to be swapping it out if you don't want to be falling asleep. And that's a tricky situation to be in, considering there's just that one more turn of Trick Room left. Sure enough, it is going to be leaving the field. You don't want to risk any of your Pokemon taking a snooze in the middle of this top 8. And it will be the Palkia coming in its place.
Yeah, because you can't be put to sleep there, because you need, once the dimensions go back, to be able to twist it again.
Exactly. Palkia will take this hit from the Gastrodon pretty well. Stark contrast to the Incineroar that's not going to appreciate that high horsepower from the Calyrex Ice Rider whatsoever. And that's a Chilling Nay boost now.
That is a Chilling Nay boost, so now you're going to be doing more damage every single turn. Twisted Dimensions will return to normal there, but popping the air balloon was pretty important there for Paul a couple of turns ago, because he was able to use the high horsepower there. That is information that Paul is going to have to worry about later on in the set. Since it's been revealed, you never know if the Incineroar can try to switch in on the high horsepower so it takes no damage. But now this is the perfect time for Calvin to bring back the Calyrex Shadow Rider as the fastest Pokemon on the field right now. And with already the chip damage taken on the other side of Paul's Pokemon, they're not too healthy. If you go for an Astral Barrage, that is a spread attack. You're going to be attacking first. And, depending on how the Palkia is trained, it might be able to take it. But obviously the Calyrex being so low already, and it being the Ghost attack would be able to knock it out here. So Paul is now kind of on the back foot. One of the best things is a Porygon in the back, who is a normal type, doesn't worry about taking an Astral Barrage. And the Calyrex might want to switch out anyway, the Ice Rider, I should say, because if it stays in and doesn't protect it, it would most likely get knocked out.
Too many turns of pivoting, though, can lose a little bit of that offensive pressure or lose that opportunity to try and go and be setting up. Palkia, a Pokemon that can be setting up in some of those cases, does need to leave and make way for the Porygon to instead. It will be that Astral Barrage. And considering the Protect on the Calyrex Ice Rider this time around, nothing is going to be coming out from that except for this yawn targeting into that Porygon 2 slot. So now Paul has a big decision to make.
He has a decision to make, and Calvin essentially had no decision, because there was a very simple play to Astral Barrage and yawn the other slot, expecting Palkia not to get knocked out from it, but Calyrex Ice Rider to be knocked out from the Astral Barrage. So that was just a very safe play. And then Paul, now that he protected this turn, he can't do that patent. It's very hard to do the patented Protect Trick Room, because you only have the 30% chance of getting a double Protect.
A Calyrex Shadow Rider going to be going to the back to bring way for the Zacian instead. And that is going to make sure it's not going to be falling to the foul play from the Porygon 2. Notably, no swap, so will be falling asleep at the end of the turn. A Glacial Lance fired off. Instead of trying to get this Trick Room set up, Paul's looking to try and get some things eliminated. Neither Pokemon is going to go down, though. Now Gastrodon can fire off an Earth Power in retaliation, and this Calyrex is getting real low, and now Porygon 2 is asleep.
Paul was 16 HP away from getting a double KO and bringing Calvin down to his final Pokemon. That would have been a 4-1 Pokemon advantage for Paul. So even with the snoozing Porygon, it would have been enough. And now this Zacian can just claim a KO into the Calyrex.
Yep, that is going to be the Behemoth Blade. That's going to deal way more than enough damage that's needed. The fact that Calvin still had the speed on his side, very useful in that situation, especially since the Porygon 2 can't do much anyways. Now this is the opportunity to start chipping away at some of the damage onto this pesky duck. It takes the hits very well, considering the Eviolite that you're going to see on 99% of the Porygons, but it can't do anything in return, and that's a tricky spot.
And I was expecting the Incineroar to come in to be able to intimidate the Zacian potentially there, but Paul deciding instead on this turn, opting to bring that Palkia back out. He still has not Dynamaxed yet, in this game here, in this game one. So this could be the option if you want to double the HP like we were talking about in team preview. Makes it so much harder for the Palkia to get knocked out. But you are sitting in front of a play rough Zacian potentially. It's obviously one of its most common moves since it is a fairy type, and you gain that same type attack bonus from clicking there into the Palkia. But Porygon's going to need to wake up here and get back into the battle, because if Paul is just going to stay asleep, every turn it's snoozing is a turn it's not clicking Trick Room or clicking the foul play to get rid of that last remaining 10 HP on Zacian.
And just as you were calling out, it will be that Dynamax now, so the Palkia can have that HP and be able to go out onto the offensive. And you never know, Porygon could wake up at any point. It's already taken its sleep turn. You never know. If it could wake up and get this Trick Room off, it could be an absolutely fantastic position for this Palkia. Just needs to be getting through the attacks versus the Zacian, trying to make sure that this Porygon 2 can't do anything, though. That is going to be picking up the KO instead. In close combat, a powerful move, one that you don't always see on the Zacian, but definitely has its use.
Yeah, the close combat does significantly more damage than the Sacred Sword does. So you trade those defense, drops on the Calyrex, or excuse me, on the Zacian, because it does so much more damage. I'm not sure Sacred Sword is able to take that KO. So Calvin understanding his team composition and his move sets perfectly there, because he knew that his close combat would be enough to take down Porygon. That was a great play from Calvin.
Max Wormwind into the Gastrodon, make sure that you can't get yawned as well. Bring this down to 2 Pokemon APs heading into this as well. With the Wormwind, at least being able to make sure that the Zacian's attack does go down, and the Incineroar being the last Pokemon here on Paul's side to further bring down the Zacian's attack.
And because the Porygon got knocked out before it ever woke up, was not able to Trick Room, we are still in those regular dimensions that Zacian and Calyrex Shadow Rider really appreciate, because they are so fast. So anytime, this turn you have to worry about that fake out, but anytime post fake out, you would be able to move first before Palkia and Incineroar could.
Yeah, the Protect and the fake out as the Astral Barrage comes out. And that is going to be enough to clean up the KO on the Incineroar. It was already so low, and that is a grim nade boost. Now we'll have to see where Paul is targeting with this. Considering just the Wormwind, it will be into the Calyrex Shadow Rider to be cleaning up the KO and bring it down to 1 Pokemon apiece, but still further bringing the attack down on the Zacian.
That's now 2 attack drops, which is effectively -1 for the Zacian, and then the Incineroar switched in as well, making it -2 there. So it's just a lot of compounding intimidates here to try to mitigate the amount of damage that Zacian has. It's 1-to-1 in the Pokemon count right now. This Zacian is not going to do as much damage. You might have to rely on that Play Rough because it's super effective compared to the Behemoth Blade, which does the double damage there. And Play Rough is only 90% accurate, so that's definitely a position you don't want to find yourself in.
It will be that Behemoth Blade, though, seeing if that double damage in Dynamax is going to be enough, despite all of the attack drops coming on out, and it's not even going to be close. Palkia takes the hit so well, and on top of that, the reveal of the berry. I mean, in this case, not going to necessarily matter, but it's going to be information gained. The Max Flare, it's only 10 HP. That's going to be picking up the KO, and Paul Chua to take match 1.
Yeah, a great display of Paul from game 1 here, even though he did not utilize Trick Room that effectively in this match. He was still able to come away with the victory. So now we have, some really cool information shown. The Porygon here on Paul's end. So Paul is not necessarily safe to just click Trick Room on every turn. This turn he can do the fake out into Zacian and get the Trick Room, but at some point he would then get Calvin can respond by being able to one-hit KO the Porygon.
The Incineroar lead, though, from Paul to at least grab that Intimidate onto the Zacian to be bringing it down, as well as apply a bit of pressure with the fake out onto the Zacian, or being able to hit that throat drop onto the Calyrex Shadow. And as well with this Porygon, too, you're talking about the fact that it has to be respected, but sudden you can swap things out. You're forcing the Zacian then to be lowering its defensive stat to where the Incineroar can make impact that way, and that's even if the fake out doesn't be coming on through, which is exactly what we're going to see here. So the Zacian's effectively not going to do anything, and the Astral Barrage is not really going to be doing too much either. Nothing into the Porygon too, and we know how Incineroars take those hits.
That actually did a lot more than I was anticipating. It did almost half of Incineroar's HP.
I mean, it did do a bunch of damage, but still comfortably over half, and most notably as well, an absolute free Trick Room setup for this Porygon 2.
Yeah, you're not worried about it at all. And as you were mentioning, that Intimidate from the Incineroar could could prove critical in this situation, because does the neutral attack from Zacian on the close combat still get the knockout from full HP like it did on Porygon in the previous game? That's something that Paul obviously has to be aware of. And if Calvin, I was going to say, you have to get rid of the Calyrex 2 games in a row. It just is not the strongest lead option here, and you got to bring something else in.
I believe, too, the Porygon 2 did have a little bit of chip, so even more up in the air on how that might have gone down. Now this Calyrex Shadow Rider, not safe at all considering the situation, has to swap out in lieu of this Incineroar. The foul play into the slot to make sure a huge punish is going to be going off if the Calyrex didn't swap out, and it will break the air balloon onto that Incineroar. Now a big Flare Blitz onto the Zacian, bringing it down real low. At least, though, it will get this opportunity to attack in the Behemoth Blade to see just how much it's going to do into the Incineroar. But the recoil and everything will be enough for this KO.
The Incineroar took 2 resisted attacks this game and got knocked out by them because of that recoil damage from the Flare Blitz. So very interested to find out what this, how Paul has trained his Incineroar, if it's more offensively focused compared to those typical defenses we see from the Incineroar, because it took so much damage from those attacks. But now Calyrex Ice Rider is on the field with 3 turns of Trick Room remaining. This is a spot with the Zacian already under half of its HP that you can really be excited about, because the air balloon has been popped yet again. So if you wanted to hit, it is a tough spot, because Calyrex would like to target both of these Pokemon, but he can't. You'd like to hit the Stomping Tantrum into Incineroar, but then if you do that, leave Zacian potentially free to Behemoth Blade in retaliation. Or if you target down the Zacian to get your Chilling Neigh boost, then that leaves Incineroar to try to hit you back with either the Flare Blitz or potentially a Dark Attack that it would have access to. So even though Paul, this is the best spot for his Trick Room team, it's still not necessarily the safest.
You need a little bit safer with the Incineroar swapping out the Calyrex Shadow Rider coming back in. Make sure that you can have that Intimidate in the back to try and put a little bit of pressure and slow down this Calyrex a little bit. But that's not where this pivot's going to stop. It's going to be a double swap. The Gastrodon making this appearance yet again, something that does pretty well in this Trick Room. Now the Glacial Lance opting to be going for that instead of the high horsepower to hit both targets, and considering the swap's going to do so much damage. A foul play to follow up into the Gastrodon instead. If it caught the Calyrex, it could have been devastating, but Gastrodon will take that keeps better.
Yeah, well, the Glacial Lance into Calyrex and Gastrodon, they took that much worse than the Incineroar and the Zacian would have, because that was a resisted attack onto both of those Pokemon there. So Calvin, a bit of a defensive turn that did not work out in his benefit, because there are still 2 turns of Trick Room remaining, and there's nothing stopping Paul from clicking Glacial Lance yet again, which would give you those Chilling Neigh boosts potentially on one of the slots. But Calyrex Shadow Rider is not known for its bulk, so who knows, maybe this next Glacial Lance could still knock out through Dynamax, but Calvin really has to hope it doesn't.
Yeah, the Dynamax too, there's 2 Pokemon on Paul's end that can hit into it already. The double HP.
And they're both faster because Trick Room's up.
They're both going to be moving first. The Calyrex not having much at all. Now the Yawn coming out from this Gastrodon back into that Porygon 2 slot. But now here is where we're going to find out exactly the damage is going to be done. The pickup, the KO will be picked up onto the Gastrodon, bringing this Calyrex so low. But this Porygon 2 still has this chance to attack. The foul play, it is going to be enough. It was only 1 turn of Dynamax in game number 1, but it's 0 turns in game number 2.
Yeah, I feel like Calvin really had Paul pinned there with Calyrex Ice Rider. When you had Incineroar Zacian on the field, if you double targeted it, he couldn't reliably KO both of them at the same time. So if he took down Zacian, you would have Incineroar to respond, and vice versa. If he knocked out the Incineroar, the Zacian would be able to Behemoth Blade into that slot. So instead, a double switch also, because you did no damage from either of your slots there. You took over half HP from both of your Pokemon on the switch in, and then because of Trick Room, you just took over half yet again from the spread Glacial Lance there. So Paul with the 3-2 Pokemon advantage advantage and 1 turn of Trick Room remaining here for his now double boosted Calyrex Ice Rider.
And completely in the driver's seat looking to make it into this top 4. I mean, look, the Zacian over on Calvin's end, less than half HP. It would be, I don't know.
You do have Fake Out to stop this last turn of Trick Room if the Calyrex wants to try to go for an attack, and then so it's definitely a scary position here. But remember, he still hasn't even used Dynamax yet, Paul. So once the dimensions, I guess, or you could use it right now on this turn on your Calyrex.
I mean, this is still going to do a bunch of damage anyway.
That stops the Fake Out.
It does.
So this is your last turn.
Well.
You're faster now, and you're not going to get knocked out.
Yeah, and making sure that you can try and secure one of these KOs, considering that you should have the Max Quake at your disposal to be able to do so. The Zacian just trying to make it through this turn and make it out of the Trick Room to try and get some damage is going to go for this Protect. No Fake Out, as the Incineroar has a different plan up its sleeve. The Max Quake now into the Zacian slot is going to bring it just down to 24 HP. Not being able to fully protect itself, and that's going to get a special defensive not matter going into this. Now the Incineroar is going to be the Throat Chop hitting into the Palkia.
That is a gigantic survive from the Zacian, only taking a quarter of the intended damage it was supposed to from the Max Quake, because now the speed has returned to normal. Zacian is the fastest Pokemon on the field, and if you ever target that Behemoth Blade into Calyrex, that will do double damage because of Behemoth Blade's ability in there, or description I should say, and you are also hitting it super effectively. So Paul kind of having to sacrifice his Calyrex to try to win this game.
Yeah, as the Behemoth Blade comes out to hit into the Calyrex, it will be the one-hit KO in max. Super effective hit, that double damage, not going to stand a chance. There is still another Pokemon on Paul's side to deal some damage back in retaliation to try and pick up the KO. It'll be the Flamethrower coming out, and surely that is going to be grabbing this KO. Super effective hit. The critical just for that little bit of rubbing the salt in the wound. Now it's only Incineroar against the world.
And this Incineroar obviously not having a way to super effectively hit the Palkia. So even if there wasn't the Porygon in the back, which obviously Paul still has access to, Paul having the potentially Hydro Pump or whatever water move he wants on the Palkia in this situation gives him the massive advantage against Incineroar.
The Spatial Rend, you just got to be clicking the buttons now to end the game off the Incineroar. It's going to take the attacks pretty well, but is so much mileage to make up. The Throat Chops keep consistently adding more and more, and it's going to take another turn to be closing this out.
And this is why Paul is one of the best players in the world, because he's not taking unnecessary risks. Spatial Rend, even though it will do less damage, will always connect. So you know, like we said, slow and steady wins the race, and Paul has won this race.
And that is going to be a 2-0 to be moving on into top 4 for Paul Chua. Another accomplishment to add to the mile-long list.